Okay, let's get started. Welcome and thank you all so much for joining us for ECA's monthly national call. Some of you may be new to Elders Climate Action. I want to tell you a little bit about who we are. We are grandparents, great uncles, great aunts, and everyday folks who are determined to do all we can to leave a sustainable planet for future generations and for all life. Our programs, communications, and chapters are focused on building the political will needed to solve the climate crisis. ECA is elder-centered and volunteer-driven. We seek to inform, inspire, and engage older generations to take action on the climate crisis at the local, state, and federal levels. So we hope you will consider getting more involved with us. Now, a little bit about this call. The call is going to last about an hour. Um, First, we'll have a presentation followed by a Q&A. So please, during the presentation, as questions appear in your mind, add them to the Q&A box for our speaker at the end of her presentation. And we are delighted this evening to have as our speaker Ashita Gona. She is a senior associate on the Carbon-Free Buildings program at RMI. I started to say Rocky Mountain Institute, their former name. She works there with stakeholders in the Mid-Atlantic to transition the region's buildings away from fossil fuels. Ashita previously worked as a communications associate at Climate Nexus, where she found opportunities to promote building and appliance electrification measures in the media. Ashita has also worked as an environmental journalism fellow, as an intern at the White House Council on Environmental Quality, and as a freelance writer. So let's turn it all over to Ashita.
Thank you, Francis. Thank you all so much for being here tonight and inviting me to speak. I have worked with several members of Elders for Climate Action through various work I've done in Maryland and Pennsylvania, and so it's just really nice to be on this call and to share some things that I've learned. I will share my screen. Can folks see this? Okay.
Yes, it looks good.
Great. Okay, so like Francis mentioned, today we're going to be talking about building decarbonization, so creating healthy, affordable, zero carbon buildings. Specifically, we're going to be talking more about the residential side. I'll get a little bit into why in this presentation. And before I dive in too deep, another thing that I work on at RMI is we're also trying to see how to ensure that building decarbonization is accessible to low and moderate income households. So I can talk a little bit more about that in this presentation. But with that, I will keep going. So our topics for today are, we're going to have a little bit of background on buildings emissions and why they matter. Potential solutions to buildings emissions, some myth busting around the solutions, and then we're going to have time for Q&A. So building emissions, what are the climate and health impacts of building emissions? So when we talk about building emissions, well, first of all, buildings are where we eat, live, and play. It's where, as a country, we spend 80% of our time are in buildings. So they're a really important part of our society. And when we talk about emissions that come from buildings, there are three buckets. There are the operating emissions. So on the left-hand side, you see direct and indirect emissions. So direct emissions are from the actual combustion of fossil fuel in homes. So that means like a gas furnace, it combusts gas like in your home. Propane heaters, gas stoves, gas clothes dryers, any appliance that's going to combust a fossil fuel in your home is going to release direct emissions. We also have indirect emissions. So this is from the power plants that create electricity that power your home. So, anytime you turn on a light bulb, it's being powered by electricity, but that layer of emissions is not coming directly from your home, it's coming from this power plant that's elsewhere. And the last bucket is embodied. So that's the life cycle emissions from anything used in the construction materials of homes. So that includes the manufacturing process for like concrete and steel, the transportation. So actually, those are quite significant, and we'll talk about those in a second too. But today, I'm actually going to focus on direct emissions. Again, this is the direct combustion of fossil fuels in your homes. For most Americans, this means gas furnaces and gas stoves. And the reason I'm focusing on that is actually because it's my subject matter specialty. We actually have other folks on our team that work on indirect and embodied carbon as well. But yeah, this is what I know the most about. Before we dive too deep into direct emissions specifically, I did want to just talk about like buildings emissions in general. So, you know, US building sector emissions are associated with about 2.5 gigatons of carbon a year, which doesn't really mean a lot, I know, but that is actually about 30 to 40% of the country's emissions. So it is not insignificant. I mean, that's like a very significant portion of the country's emissions. Of that, about 20% of the building sector emissions are actually direct emissions, so from burning fossil fuels in your buildings. And if you see in this last bar here, so methane is not necessarily a direct emission. What we say when we say methane here is actually methane leaks from pipelines that are going towards buildings. And as you can see, it says that there's about 130 to 460 million metric tons of CO2 from this. That's a huge range because we actually don't know how much methane is being leaked into the atmosphere because of emissions from pipelines. But that is also pretty significant. And in my personal opinion, it sort of falls in the same category as direct emissions because it is the byproduct of combusting fuels in homes. So that's all to say that building sector emissions really need to be addressed. They come from a lot of different places, but they really do need to be addressed. All right, so I had mentioned, you know, we have these indirect emissions and we have these direct emissions. Indirect emissions are from a power plant far away that sends electricity to your home. One thing about indirect emissions is that they're actually falling because the electric grid itself is becoming more efficient. There's more renewables that are coming online. Solar and wind are becoming more effective and adding a lot of capacity to the grid. So as you can see, this green line is the indirect emissions. We're down 35% from 2007 on indirect emissions, and that is definitely progress. However, direct emissions from fossil fuel combustions in homes has stayed relatively stable, which is concerning for a couple of reasons. One is because anytime someone replaces a gas furnace with a gas furnace, for example, that home or building is basically being locked into fossil fuel use for the next 15 to 20 years, like the lifespan of the gas furnace. There's not a lot of opportunities to get that home off of fossil fuels. The same goes with gas stoves or propane heaters. And the second reason is that once the home is on these fossil fuel appliances, as I just mentioned, it's very difficult to get them off. You have to do some pretty proactive planning in order to get a home off of fossil fuels. So it's unlikely that when that new gas furnace breaks 20 years down the line, that home is going to have the electric capacity it needs to put in a heat pump. So you're once you put in a gas furnace, you're going down this road, this like treadmill that's hard to get off of. One more distinction within the building sector that's important to note is that there's two types of buildings, right? There's commercial and residential. So commercial refers to any building that you play or work in, so warehouses, office buildings, even theme parks fall under commercial. So those all require power, space heating, lighting, anything it needs to provide those sorts of services goes under commercial building emissions. Then we have residential, which is mostly single family homes and multifamily buildings. And direct residential emissions are about 30% greater than commercial, which is one reason why our team does focus more on residential. But there is one other reason we focus more on residential, which I'll get to in a second, and that is human health. Before we talk about health, though, in terms of what people are using to heat their homes, like what sort of fossil fuels they're using, by far the most popular is methane, or otherwise known as natural gas. As you can see, the blue section of this chart are emissions from natural gas used in homes in the US. Over time, we're definitely going to see a decrease in oil and propane just because those fuels are so much more expensive. And it's becoming more and more popular to just get off of them because they're just so expensive. But it is possible that we might see increases in gas use without intervention. So, yep. In terms of who is using fossil fuels to heat their homes and where those direct fossil fuel emissions are coming from in buildings, what we mostly see is that colder states, so the Northeast, Mid-Atlantic, and Midwest, tend to use gas furnaces, especially. That's just what over time they've been gravitated towards. Whereas in like the Southeast, people actually do use a lot more heat pumps because it's just not as hot there. And the older generation of heat pump technologies wasn't that good. So, more people in the Southeast could use it. So we have states like New York and Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, Minnesota. Those are colder states. We also have a lot of very populous states like California, Pennsylvania, and then we also have a lot of states that produce gas, like Pennsylvania are just fossil fuel states. So Pennsylvania and Texas and Ohio. So this is the spread. By far, New York and California release the most of these building sector emissions. So, well, direct building sector emissions. And actually, New York and California are where we're seeing some of the most progressive policies to address this as well. So I mentioned health earlier. So one thing that I actually didn't realize until I dug more deep into this topic was actually how combustion of fossil fuel in your homes, it's so discreet, but it actually does have a strong impact on human health that I just wasn't even aware of before I started this job. But basically, there are two sorts of health impacts that we think about. When you combust a fossil fuel in your home, you have the indoor health impact and you have the outdoor health impact. Literally from releasing those fossil fuel emissions in your home, they get emitted outside and they do like contribute to local air quality. RMI did a analysis on the impact of direct building emissions on outdoor health, outdoor air quality and health. And we discovered that at least 18,000 early deaths and about 200 billion in health impacts are the byproduct of outdoor air pollution from indoor building fossil fuel combustion. So, it is actually very significant. All of those gas furnaces and gas stoves, they do contribute to local air quality. They do make people with asthma have more severe symptoms. And it's just not something that we talk about a lot. In the US, 1 out of 3 homes actually cook with gas. And cooking with gas has a pretty significant impact on indoor air quality. I don't know if anyone here has a one of those air filters in their homes that tells them the quality of their home and the amount of particulate matter in their homes. Um, I recently did that with a gas stove, and it was amazing how quickly the filter detected more particulate air matter. Um, Lower income households, there's also a big equity issue here because lower income households may be at a higher risk of exposure to gas stove pollution. And gas stove pollution releases nitrogen dioxide, which is a huge contributor to asthma, flare-ups, and is especially dangerous for a vulnerable population, including the children and the elderly. Some of the things that contribute to lower income households being at higher risk of this from the effects of nitrogen dioxide are that they have smaller unit sizes. There tend to be more people living in the homes. Um, they tend to live in older homes that have inadequate ventilation, especially above the stove. It's so important if you have a gas stove to have appropriate ventilation, getting those fumes out. Some people use stove and ovens to supplement heat. It's actually we've been doing some work in Boston, and the amount of people that need to resort to using their stove for heat is pretty alarming. There's higher exposure to outdoor pollution because maybe there's more cars in the area or maybe more power plants in the area, and there's a greater asthma burden. So not only is this worrisome for people who have children with asthma, this is also just an equity issue. And like so many other things in the climate and environment movement, certain communities are being left behind or being left out. And it's so important they're at the table and that their health concerns are being addressed as well. So what are some potential solutions? Well, heat pumps. So for those of you who are not as familiar with heat pumps, I'll just give you a general idea of how they work. So they're an electric device that transfers heat from a colder area to a hotter area by using mechanical energy. So I wrote up a better explanation for this. So basically, they use the same technology as an air conditioner, which cools your home using a refrigerant. The only major difference between an air conditioner and heat pump is that a heat pump has a reversing valve so that it can actually heat the home as well as cool the home. So heat pumps can actually do both. So if you have an old gas furnace and no AC, a heat pump is actually an amazing option for you because you can get both. And there are several types of heat pumps. There's air source, geothermal, and water. The one that my team is most familiar with in certain situations is the air source heat pump. And it's a really amazing technology that back in like the 80s and early 90s wasn't as strong. So there were certain climates they didn't work as well. And like they worked in cold climates, but there were times where it was too cold and some of the heat pumps couldn't handle it. The technology has come a lot farther since then. And so there are heat pumps designed for very cold weather, like -20, So they've come a long way, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well in a bit. There are a few challenges and risks with heat pump technology. And I should have mentioned, heat pumps are not just for space heating, they can be used for water heating as well. So they exist for both sort of things. The upfront cost of heat pumps tends to be a bit higher than the fossil fuel counterpart. The great news there is that there's a lot of subsidies available that encourage people to adopt heat pump technology. There is some concern that they can raise operational costs. And one of the things that we're starting to understand is that actually the operational cost risk very much depends on what the utility rates look like in a certain area, as well as the efficiencies of the grid in certain areas. So while heat pump technology is more efficient, it's really up to the state's public service commission to ensure that the electric rates are fair enough to make heat pumps a viable option. And we are seeing more of a movement in that direction. We're seeing more protective electric rates for lower income households. We're seeing states where utilities are starting to introduce winter electric heating rates. So if you have a heat pump, your like per kilowatt rate is cheaper in the winter than it would be in the summer, just because they know that people really need heat pump technology in the winter. And then the last challenge and risk here is heat pumps are the most efficient when the home is weatherized, just because of the way the technology works. If you have a drafty house, you risk the heat pump actually becoming pretty inefficient. And so one of the things that we're seeing, especially in lower income and older homes, is that the condition of the home is very important. And so we are trying to find ways to couple heat pump installations with whole home retrofits to get these homes in better shape and have a tighter envelope so that heat and cold air conditioning is not escaping. So what are the policy options? Like, what sort of policy should states be pursuing to reduce their direct emissions from buildings? We're seeing quite a few emerge across the country. The first bucket, I would call them, are what I call market signal policies. Basically, these are policies that regulate different sectors of the building economy, I guess you could call. The first one is the appliance sector. So the manufacturers of appliances. What we're seeing coming out in more and more states are these zero emission heating equipment standards. And basically, a state will just say, like, by, a certain year, let's say 2027, we actually won't be selling gas appliances anymore. Like, we won't be selling gas space heaters anymore, for example. And how this works for the appliance manufacturers is this is actually a market signal to them that, like, hey, by this year, we actually need to start figuring out ways to phase out the sale of gas appliances and increase the sale of electric appliances. And we need to start investing in research and development to bring down costs for consumers so that it's a viable option and we can actually sell units. The next sector, economic sector, would be utilities. And what we're seeing in terms of policies are clean heat standards, which basically create a marketplace for utilities to buy and sell credits based on the work that they've done to encourage electrification and decarbonization of buildings. And the last sector would be property owners and builders. And we're seeing new building energy performance standards and building energy codes for new buildings come out, where building owners are going to start being responsible for reducing emissions to a certain amount by a certain year. And then also we're seeing new rules come out about, if you're building new buildings, we don't want to see any gas hookups, because the best way to prevent gas emissions is to actually just not hook buildings up to gas in the first place. So these are just some examples of some of the policies that we're seeing come out. We're also seeing that more and more state public service commissions are requiring that utilities like gas utilities especially, make a long-term business plan for phasing out gas sales, which is very interesting. But basically, they're like, hey, we know that, gas sales are actually not in line with our state climate goals. And, we want the gas utilities to be able to prepare for that future and ensure that their workforce and their profits are not going to be too affected. So what are some alternative business models they can pursue? And then we're seeing more and more states look at, a lot of states have energy efficiency programs that are funded by utility surcharges. And so we're seeing more and more states look at those energy efficiency programs and ask themselves, how many of our dollars, our state energy efficiency dollars, are going towards gas furnaces or going towards fossil fuel appliances? And at what point can we start phasing out the use of those energy efficiency dollars towards fossil fuel appliances? And then one thing I'll note quickly, I'm sure many of you are familiar with the Inflation Reduction Act. States are creating programs to distribute over $9 billion in home energy rebates across the country. And a lot of that money is going to go towards heat pump technologies and relevant home retrofits like weatherization. So it's a really great time to start, kickstarting this work and thinking about how best to introduce these policies. I just wanted to bust a few myths that we've heard over the years about heat pumps and electrified technologies. I'll go through this kind of quickly because I know we're getting to time, but there's a myth that all electric homes cost more to build and operate. And what we're actually seeing is that the upfront and operating costs in major cities that RMI has studied are actually lower for all electric new construction, including in New York City, where it's $2,900 lower. And in some places, maybe it's at cost parity, but it's so rare that you're spending more to build an all electric new home than a mixed fuel home. There's a myth that heat pumps don't work in cold climates, and while this may have been true in the past, they actually do work in every climate now, but at different efficiencies. And in the most extreme cold cases, you may need an electric resistance backup, but the technology is just getting better and better every day. There are over 37,000 heat pump models on NEEP's cold climate heat pump list, which we can send around afterwards. And then in the Northeast alone in 2020, over 170,000 heat pump units were sold, and it's very cold in the Northeast. So, it just goes to show they do work. There's a myth that the electric grid isn't large enough for all electric buildings. That is, we pretty much know that that's not true because building electrification actually increases the winter loads, but the summer loads are already pretty high. So if you can handle the summer, you can handle the winter. Yeah, summer peak in the PJM Mid-Atlantic region is about 20% higher than in the winter. So there is some headroom there. Like if you can handle 20% more in the summer, you can handle that extra 20% in the winter. And then there's also various studies from across the country that have found that upgrades needed to the grid to accommodate all electric buildings actually don't outpace historic grid investments. The grid has to be upgraded anyways. And so what we need to accommodate all electric buildings is actually not crazy. And it's in line with what we've had to do historically. There's a myth that homes with furnaces can ride out a power outage. That is actually not true. Both heat pumps and gas furnaces need electric power to run. Furnaces need electricity to power the blower fan and to light their burners. So that is false. And there's a myth that we don't need to worry about the gas system because we can just shift to hydrogen. Only 2% of US hydrogen is actually green. It's a pretty inefficient use of renewable energy. And you actually can't use hydrogen in a lot of the existing gas piping and appliances that exist currently. It would take a lot of investment to retrofit those infrastructures to accommodate hydrogen. And also hydrogen releases NOx emissions. And so it just doesn't feel like a feasible option. So I will stop there. I welcome any questions, and I will say I have an amazing team and everyone has different specialties. And if there's something that I don't know the answer to, I can definitely get it from my team. So thank you all so much for your time, and I welcome any questions.
Thanks, Ashita, and please, everyone, put your questions in the chat. We got one question. Someone who has a gas fireplace and is feeling guilty about that, but is concerned about wood burning fireplaces and not sure what to do.
Um, I don't think you have to feel guilty about it. It's the home that you live in. Um, there is, you know, no one is advocating that your gas appliance be ripped out of your home today. There is this feeling that we want to wait till your gas appliance is at the end of its life, and then that's a good time to replace it with an electric one. So I'm not as familiar with gas fireplaces, but I'm assuming there will be a time where the gas fireplace may no longer work. That might be a great time to think about, you know, there are electric fireplace options now. So when that time comes, you can think about something like that. And in the meanwhile, you can make sure that your home has the electric capacity it needs to handle that. So we don't want you to rip out your gas appliances today. That's not necessary, but just some forward planning on decarbonizing your home might be helpful.
You mentioned the IRA rebates, but those are still, I think, in process in most places. What about the IRA tax credits? Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I will be honest with you. I'm not as familiar with the IRA, but I have a team member who is actually his job is 100% thinking about the IRA. So I can if it's possible with the ECA team, I can send around more details on the tax credit. But I would say the only thing with the tax credit is they're great if you're maybe a bit more affluent because you can get that money later down the line, but it's not very accessible for low and moderate income households because they often can't proactively finance something and then wait for the tax credit. So for those households, we want to make sure that they have rebates. But I can share more information on the actual tax credits post this call, if that's okay.
Okay, that's great. I was asking, can a heat pump keep a home cool in 115-degree heat in Phoenix?
It should be able to, from everything that I understand. I think from what I understand, it's a lot harder to heat a home with a heat pump than it is to cool a home with a heat pump. So that should be a good option for you, if you're the one living in Phoenix.
So how do we help low-income homes that rely on gas appliances but have trouble with spending the money to buy electric appliances?
Yeah, so one thing that we've been doing more and more of is actually like most cities and counties and states have multiple programs to help low and moderate income households with home upgrades. There are a lot of resources that exist. I mean, often they are under-resourced, but they do exist. And so we've been trying to find ways to work with more of these um, organizations and groups to find ways to incorporate decarbonization into the work that they do, whether it's through doing home energy assessments to see, how old is this person's gas furnace? What does their current electric system look like? What interventions does the home need in order to be decarbonized? So there's this element of getting the home ready, and then there's the element of financing all of this. There are actually fairly generous federal dollars, including there's like weatherization funding that comes federally that folks can use to get their home weatherized. Now at the IRA, there's like very generous incentives to actually get the heat pump installed. And so it really has to be a combination of stacking and braiding all these different sources to not only decarbonize the home, but just make the home healthier in general. So we are working on ways to stack and braid these various sources, especially because each state has their own funding buckets. And so you really have to go like a state by state approach to see like what resources does this state have that can be combined with federal resources to help an individual household.
Okay. Someone asked, it's a 30-year-old house and it has an 8-year-old furnace. So what kind of electrical system changes is he likely to need to go to a heat pump when the furnace needs to be replaced?
Great question. So I am not an electrician, so I don't want to speak too out of turn. But what we have been seeing is that people generally need wiring upgrades. The old wiring systems tend to be incompatible or not able to handle the 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 amount of load that will be required. You may also need a panel upgrade. Um, but this is all to say, like, I think the best thing to do is to actually just get a heat pump contractor or an electrician out to your home and get like an assessment from them and see what they think, because I think you might be surprised. I mean, from what I understand, homes that are more like 50 years old tend to have the really old wiring systems that don't usually work with um, heat pumps and things like that.
Someone's asking about the urgency of climate change. We shouldn't be, if we can afford it, shifting away from gas before our gas appliances are giving up the ghost.
Yeah, I think there's also a messaging aspect to this where we don't want to scare. I mean, I think here I'm preaching to the choir. You guys are elders for climate action. You want to do what you can do today to solve this issue. Um, so if I think for this group, there might be more of a willingness to take out your gas stove and take out your gas furnace, but that's not the reaction that we usually get with like the general American public. And so there is a messaging piece that through trial and error, um, we've realized like you don't want to scare people and make them feel like, oh, the government's coming to rip out my gas furnace tomorrow. Like people still need to feel like they have a choice. And, I think the best thing to do is just to tell them, not I think, the messaging shows that the best thing to do is to encourage them, like, to think about how old their appliances are and to start planning for a future where they don't have a gas appliance, whenever that may be. And usually it's at the end of life of the gas appliance.
And you mentioned the importance of weatherization to get great results from a heat pump. Um, I've got some questions about insulation. One about what do you think about newer insulation options like spray and hempcrete?
Okay, so I'm more of a policy person, so I think I have some personal feelings on these, but I definitely um am not I'm not a weatherization specialist, so I don't think I should go too far down this road. But I think this is a very good question for a heat pump contractor or just a weatherization contractor in general. You just want a really tight envelope on the home, um, which would also mean like mitigating some other things in the home, like moisture issues. You want to make sure that your home doesn't have moisture issues before you tighten that envelope a lot. So I would recommend getting a second opinion on that.
I think that's a great opinion or a great reason to get a second opinion.
Yeah.
Um, and we do have some people at ECA who help people find answers to these kind of questions. So instead of going into more insulation questions, after you're done, maybe we'll talk a little bit about how you connect with people in ECA who might be able to answer some of those or help you figure out how to find the right person in your area. Um, one person wants to know if there's a member of your team working in or with Minnesota.
There is actually, we have a Midwest team. So yeah, I'm not as familiar with the policies that they're working on, but if there's a specific policy, I could flag it for them.
Okay, so someone's asking about having a relatively small gas heater as an emergency backup in places with zero emission heating standards. That um, he had once used a 20,000 BTU propane heater when the electricity was out.
Um, uh, is the question, is that okay or a good idea?
I think so. If
Okay.
that's not the question, if the person who asked could clarify it in the Q&A, but I think that's it.
Okay.
Maybe
Oh, go ahead.
maybe one way of looking at it is what are the pros and cons as opposed to maybe battery backup.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, uh, I I think that, so like I mentioned, heat pump technology has come a long way. And it is very possible for the climate that you live in that there's a heat pump available that may not need any backup. But if the professional opinion is that you do need a backup, um, there are a few options. There is electric resistance, for example. Um, I don't know too much about propane heater backups. It's just not something I studied as much, but I think that, we can acknowledge that there will be situations where um, backup might be needed. The only question I would have is, you know, are you, is the resident okay with being hooked onto a fossil fuel source for how many ever years? Because that's something that's important to think about. Anytime a fossil fuel appliance is installed, you're sort of tied to that appliance for as long as you want it or for its lifetime. So if there are opportunities to maybe get off of it, that might be beneficial.
And he clarified that what he's concerned about is when the electricity goes down.
Oh, I I just I don't know too much about propane heaters. If it I think if you get a professional opinion and that, if the heat pump contractor is like, we know for sure, like this heat pump does not have the capacity to handle this climate, you definitely need a backup and you're worried about not having electricity, like that might be a good option. But yeah.
Yeah. And I think another option is to look at backing up your electricity because if you
Yeah,
propane may keep your house warm, but it'll still be dark. Um,
that's true.
so there are lots of options to look at. Another question was about millions of EVs maybe coming in 10 years or so, and how's that going to impact electrification of buildings?
You just say millions of EVs.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you
Yeah.
demand a gazillion electric cars.
Yeah, and I actually don't think it's going to impact buildings that much. If anything, it might be useful because EVs can serve as extra storage for solar panels on your home, and the energy produced by solar panels on your home. I think there is a question around grid impacts. If all homes are being electrified and all cars are being electrified, like can the grid handle it? Um, what we're seeing come out of multiple studies across the country is that um, the anticipated investments that will be needed on the grid to meet that demand don't outpace historic investment needs. So it's looking pretty positive.
Another person was commenting that um, in states like Massachusetts, they have or considering gas system decommissioning policies. And is it realistic to think that policies like that would be adopted by most states in the next 5 years?
Yeah, I mean, we are seeing a growing number. So Massachusetts did what's called a gas planning proceeding, in which they asked their utilities. I had mentioned this earlier, but they asked their utilities to start planning for a future that does not include gas, and to question the role of gas in the state's climate future. And that particular type of proceeding, we're seeing in more and more states across the country. It That question is being asked by more and more state governments as they try to figure out how they're going to reach their climate goals. And I think we're going to see more states subsequently um, take on policies that are going to like definitely phase out gas. So yeah.
Someone else commented, there are a lot of homes that are currently all electric, but they have electric resistance heating and some pretty old air conditioners. And do they benefit by moving to heat pumps?
In fact, they should be, them and old gas furnaces should be at the front of the line for heat pump installations, because heat pumps are so much more efficient um, than than like traditional ACs and resistance heating. So yes, the short answer is yes.
Great. Um, so people have noticed that renewable energy prices are dropping significantly. And, as that continues to happen, do you think we're going to see electricity cost less than gas?
Yes, I think that's what a lot of the analysis is showing. Gas prices are expected to increase and get more expensive than electricity. Another trend we're starting to see is that a lot of homes with solar on their roofs are just able to get off the grid, like especially if they have like an EV and all electric appliances, like they actually can just power themselves. In which case you're not really paying much of an energy bill at all if you're lucky. So yes, the answer to that question is yes.
Great. So, is there a good place to go to find state by state resources?
Yes, and is can we send a follow-up email, because RMI has produced state by state resources on various electrification topics.
That would be great. We will be sending out a follow-up email with the recording and with resources. So
Okay,
that
great.
that would be perfect. Um, and can you talk a little bit more about some of the state level actions that you're seeing, and what are some of the ways that folks can get involved in that?
Yeah, so we're seeing more states publicly explore some of the policies I mentioned earlier, like zero emission heating equipment standards. Like Maryland has publicly explored this, and a climate plan they recently released. Um, we've seen more states introduce the clean heat standards, where they're sort of creating this marketplace for utilities. And we've seen stricter uh, energy standards for existing buildings, and we're seeing more states introduce um, electrification requirements for new building construction. Um, our RMI, we're a research nonprofit, and so I don't think I am the best person to answer in ways that folks should get involved, although I think ECA might be great at giving some of those ideas. But I think getting involved at a local level and seeing what your county is able to do, and are they able to get stricter than these standards? Are they able to um, encourage the state to introduce some of these standards, or is maybe somewhere where I would suggest starting? So
Great. So you've given us a lot to think about, but I think that's all the questions at the moment, and I know you've got a lot on your plate right now. So thank you so much for being here and speaking with us and sharing your knowledge. Um, and please feel free to stay on for us with our short action party that's coming up, but we completely understand if that doesn't work for you. So, but we hope that the rest of you will be able to stay on with us for about 15 minutes for an action party with the Climate Action Now app. Last month, we took over 700 actions in 15 minutes. We have curated a number of critical actions for you, all related to carbon-free buildings. We're going to invite Matthew Ballrath from Climate Action Now to help us get this party started in just a moment. But first, if you haven't already, please sign your petition to our petition to President Biden and the EPA to finalize strong air pollution standards that are being considered by the EPA. And we're going to drop that link in the chat. Okay, so Matthew, please take it away and tell us how to get this action party started.
Fantastic. Well, hi, everyone. I'm Matthew. I am the Director of Content for the Climate Action Now app. And if you were on the call last month, you got a chance to use the app to take some actions after last month's call. And as Francis said, we did a great job last time. We took a ton of actions. And so this month we thought we'd bring it back. And we've geared up some actions around this month's theme, building decarbonization, which you just learned about. And now we're going to get a chance to take some action. So let me share my screen here, and I'll walk you through the process of getting the app and getting to these actions. So many of you are familiar with this screen, with this goal tracker that we use for our action parties. But if you're not, on the right-hand side here is a little box, what we call a QR code, and that's how you actually download the app that we're going to be using and get to the actions for tonight if you don't have it already. So if you're ready to go, you can take out your phone and open your camera app, whatever you use to take pictures, and point it right at that little box. And you hold it steady, a little yellow label should pop up that says Climate Action Now. If you click on that, it should take you to the App Store, the Google Play Store. It does work on iPhone or Android. So that's the main way that you can get to the actions for tonight. If that doesn't work, if QR codes aren't working for you, we have a number of other ways you can get to it as well. Down there, you can see we have a link. If you actually type that link into your phone's web browser, it will do the same thing. It will take you to the App Store to download the app. That's can.app.link/buildings, capital B. Type that into your phone's browser. If that doesn't work, there are other ways as well, so please just let me know in the chat. I'm happy to help anybody who's having technical difficulties or anything like that. Don't let that be the reason that you don't take action tonight, because we could definitely get you sorted out. But I already see once again that we've got some people doing it, taking action. The numbers are ticking up. That's what I love to see. And that's what's going on the left here. We have a little blue marble that's filling up every time somebody takes an action. That counter is incrementing. It's going up in real time, and we're trying to get to 100 actions above what we had before. So let's see if we can get to 3,100, and we'll go from there. I'll see if maybe we can get even higher than that. But we'll start with 3,100, and I love to see the numbers are already going up. But that's great. I'll leave this up for just a moment longer, and then I'll take it down, but I'll put my video frame will be a copy of this. So as we talk and as we continue to take action, you'll still have access to the QR code. You'll still be able to get on the app and get to the actions. I'm just going to take a look in the chat here, see if anybody has any issues getting on the app. Please do let me know. By the way, we have not only the actions for tonight, but we have thousands and thousands of actions in the app on every imaginable climate subject. We are doing a campaign this week on spreading the word about Biden's climate accomplishments leading up to the election, because as we all know, the Yale Climate Survey has shown that a majority of Americans are either alarmed or concerned about climate change. So it's a very, an issue of that has a strong consensus nationally. And so we want to spread the word that there is one candidate that will deliver on that and one that will not. So that's what we're doing this week. But we've done campaigns on methane, the new methane rules. We've done campaigns on all sorts of different things, and they're all there in the app in sort of an endless stream that you can scroll through every day. Take an action or 2 or 5 while you're brewing your coffee in the morning or whatever you like to do that kind of stuff. We have a ton of ECA members who are doing great work on the app. Francis, as many of you know, is a volunteer who creates many of the actions. So if you are on the app, chances are you'll see some actions that Francis has made, or Marianne Krasny, who's another wonderful ECA, not EPA, ECA member. So yeah, we do encourage you to get the app and not only take action now, but take 5 minutes a day to take some actions. All right, well, I'm going to take down my screen here. Turn it over to Brett in case you had anything you wanted to say.
Yeah, hi everybody. Thank you, Matthew. That was great. Um, yeah, I do want to give people another way that they can get to the actions for tonight. I just got myself in the middle of a flash quiz, so uh, I need to get out of the flash quiz. Okay, here we go. Let me share my screen. Okay, so here's I'm going to X out of here. I'm going to go back to the very familiar, I think for those of you who use the app, you're familiar with our action carousel. These are what each action has its own card, if you will, in this carousel. You can swipe left and right, to see them all. What a lot of people still are not really aware of is a relatively new feature. We did it in the last year called campaigns. If you look up in the upper right corner of the screen, you see right now I'm on the recommended carousel, and that's where the app is recommending things to me based on my address and other things. But then there's also campaigns. Campaigns are custom carousels that are focused on a particular subject. And they're grouped into these categories, as you can see here: clean up industry, electrify everything, environmental justice, green living, and so on. This action party today, where we're looking at electrifying our buildings, is therefore here in electrify everything. So I'm going to come here, and then I'm going to touch the browse all four, and there you'll see green buildings and appliances. And I can touch this little caret, downward pointing caret here, to learn more about it. I can then also, or I can just touch it itself, or this button here, view campaign activities. Okay, and then you see here are, for me, 20 actions, 45 minutes to take all of them. That's a way overstatement. It'd probably take more like 10 or 15 minutes to take all of these. And you'll see the check marks. I've already taken many of these actions. And your actions may be a little different depending on where you live. We did a number of actions to tell your city council members to implement REACH codes, or more energy efficient building codes, electric heating and cooling codes, and so on. Actually, I have I'd like to make an announcement of an exciting new feature in the app. For those of you who have used the app, you know that the app is very good at helping you send messages to your federal and state officials, like in this case, to my governor or my senator's House of Representatives. We are about 1 to 2 weeks away from making it possible for many of you to send messages to your city council people based on your address. And that feature will be if you live in a city of 100,000 or more people. Based on your address, the app will be able to tell you who is your city council member or members, as well as who's your mayor, city manager, and so on. So, and that will be very relevant to this topic that we're talking about tonight, because as I'm sure most of you know, building codes are primarily set at the local level. And so app users, or can-doers, as we like to refer to you, will be able to advocate for REACH codes and other things that you'd like your city to do. So that is one way you can get to the actions for tonight. And at some point, I'd encourage you to go back and look at some of the other campaigns. And believe it or not, there are a number of people, probably a few on this call tonight, who have taken all of the recommended actions in the app. That's several thousand. And then I'll get a support question saying, well, gee, how can I keep taking things? Well, then I point people over to the campaigns, because the campaigns have all of those actions and more. And most actions you can take, you can take again every 30 days or so. So if you run out of things, actions in the recommended carousel, you can go over to the campaigns carousels and take actions in that. So how we doing here? I see, Matthew, we've got 3,092. We're
You're
getting
very close.
to our first goal, folks. Way to go. And I think I'm going to jump in there and do some more myself to help us get over the finish line. Since I'm blabbing at all of you, let me blab a little bit more and make some announcements. We don't have any scheduled action parties coming up, but we do have a number of very exciting action parties in the pipeline. I think we're making a lot of progress on an action party to combat food waste, which I'm sure most of you realize is a major source of emissions in the food industry. And then we have a couple action parties that we're doing in partnership with Beyond Plastic to tackle plastic pollution. I think that will be in mid-April timeframe. And then we have a couple of Marianne students at Cornell University who are working on a fast fashion or sustainable fashion action party, probably sometime in May. We don't have the Zoom events set up yet for those things, but if y'all are getting the app, then you should be on our mailing list and get our newsletter, and that would be where that's announced. So let me shut up. And anybody else on the panel or ECA? We did it. There it is, folks. 31.
Well done, well done.
Well done.
All right, let's go for another 50.
Let's see if we can get another 50. Yeah, and so I get asked a lot, do my messages really make a difference? And I'm pretty sure now, after nearly 3 years, that they do make a difference. I think many of you who've been using the app for a while have probably had responses, personal responses from some of your elected officials, and acknowledging not just the standard boilerplate response, but oftentimes personal responses. We get a lot of reports of that. I have gotten them from my Oregon state representatives. Our action parties have helped tip the scales towards getting legislation passed. On the Climate Action Now YouTube channel, you'll find many activists from Sierra Club and other organizations basically crediting the app and the action parties with having helped get critical legislation over the finish line. So there's a lot of testimonials to that effect. So yes, your messages really do make a difference. You probably heard me say it because I say it 100 times, and I'm going to say it another 100 times. Public opinion is the only effective counterweight to the massive power of the fossil fuel industry. And the industry knows this, which is why it spends hundreds of millions of dollars on disinformation. Whereas we don't have that kind of money, right? But we do have our opinions, and the app is your opinion megaphone. Your superpower is your opinion, and the app can help you amplify your opinion. So I hope you'll do as Leslie was saying in our little meet and greet before the webinar tonight, that every morning, she takes 10 actions in the app, and that's what we recommend. But we've got another one of our ECA members, Rick Moody, has been taking 70 actions a day for the last many months. And Rick is pretty hardcore. He swipes past all the learning actions. He goes straight to the actions that say, tell your representative or tell this business CEO or whatever, to do this. And he does those. So much so to the point that he was in a face-to-face meeting with his California representative, and who recognized him just from his name based on how many messages he had sent to that representative. Okay, we're up to 312. I'm going to tell the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development to update its building energy conservation codes. Is our guest speaker still on the call with us?
Yeah.
No? Okay.
Had to jump.
Okay. So for a lot of people don't really know, the building codes, although they're passed at the local level, there's an international standards body that sets standards on building codes. And it's all there. And so this is and it does get updated, I think, annually, and it's fairly enlightened in its approach. And so what's necessary is for the cities to adopt the latest codes from the international body. We have one or two actions in the app on that, I think, on that very specific thing, urging
Yes.
local leaders to adopt the international building code standards.
Yes, also this on the state level, if they can do it, that's even better because then it will apply to the entire state. And there are a few, I think there are three that we have highlighted in the app. Kentucky, Louisiana, and one more that I don't remember that have codes from like back in the 90s or something. So that's a really good thing to do, is to encourage those states to update their building codes. But as Brett mentioned, the first action is to simply ask Housing and Urban Development to pass one blanket code for the nation that updates everything. That would be even better. So one of the big problems here is kind of the piecemeal nature of the building codes. So we really need to standardize the building codes and update the building codes.
Right. Now, one of the questions I heard, and I actually have some recent information on, was can a heat pump keep you cool in hot weather? Well, any of you who have air conditioning know that any air conditioner struggles in when there's high heat. And I am going through an upgrade process on my home, and I was doing a heat pump, but I was looking at air source heat pump versus ground source heat pump. And the information I had, which I'll just share with all of you, Robert here is the expert, so I will defer to Robert White here on this. But my information, Robert, is that a air source heat pump can get you about 20 degrees below the outdoor ambient temperature. And
I could do a little bit better than that usually. You know, we've had believe it or not, here in the Bay Area, we've had 110-degree days, and with careful planning, I get it down to about 75.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, I should have spoken to you before, because based on my information, I opted to do a ground source heat pump.
Well, that's even better. That's the gold. That's the gold standard. Good for you.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And then for other folks, you know, that the ground source, if you can afford it, is the most efficient form of heating and cooling. But also it makes you eligible for a 30% tax credit. You don't get that much of a credit with the air source heat pumps. I think it's like $1,500, Robert, if you do an air source heat pump, and that's income dependent.
Yes, and it depends on the area too. Our area has pretty nice rebates in addition to the tax credits.
Right. Okay, you'll find also in this campaign that we're doing now that there's a lot of learning actions. I'm lying to the app and telling it that I'm doing them, but I'm actually going to go back and read some of these articles that are in here. I think there's some excellent article. I'm looking at one now from Canary Media. Your next barbecue could feature an electric grill. And what a blessing that would be, not only from an energy conservation point of view, but also from an air pollution point of view. Oh, and also you'll note, those of you who are doing things, you'll notice that after every action that you take, there's a ratings, 5-star. You can rate that action. I know most people just go right by that, but that's very helpful if you will rate the actions after you've taken them, because we look at that, and because we're trying to ensure that we have a consistent high level of quality for the actions. So I would encourage you to do those things. And I'm going through my carousel now, and I'm just seeing one done stamp after another.
Brett, there's also some great quizzes in this carousel of actions this week.
I just started a quiz, Jen, and the first question is, since we have 4 more minutes, let's all do a flash quiz together. This flash
You should
quiz
share your screen, Brett. We could really do it
Oh,
together.
okay. Oh, yeah, that's an excellent idea. Thank you, Matthew. I love the flash quizzes, but as Matthew will tell you, they're a bear to create.
Yes.
They require a lot more work. Let me share this flash quiz that I'm doing. Is it working? Oh, here we go.
There it is.
Learn how insulation can help fight climate change. I'm going to press the Do It Now button. How much of an average American home's energy is used for heating and air conditioning? Anybody want to put their guess in the chat? And somebody else can keep an eye on the chat. We got to have any guesses in the chat yet? Jen or Leslie, do you notice? Has anybody made a guess?
Leslie guesses 33.
Okay, let's try that.
That would have been my guess as well.
Think
Ooh.
bigger.
All right. Richard looks like he got it. 51.
That's correct.
Whoa.
Water heating, lighting, and refrigeration account for only 27%. The remaining 21% is to power appliances. Answer the following question to find, and you'll find also in the flash quizzes there's links like this to more information. So we'll do the next question. What is one of the most practical and cost-efficient ways to make buildings more energy efficient? Keep your house cold in the winter. Oh yeah. Use multiple space heaters. Insulate your entire home. Build an entirely new home with south-facing windows. No
Somebody
sweat.
had fun with this one. I don't think
This
I
one-
wrote this.
Okay. Well, this one you don't have to have, be too smart to know the answer. Let's insulate our home. And our source for that was Project Drawdown. Way to go, Project Drawdown. If annually 2% of existing residential and commercial buildings in temperate and tropical countries install insulation, how much CO2 can we save? And I'm sure nobody has the faintest idea, right? But you can find out very quickly just by touching one of them. Oop, think bigger.
Let's hope that it's the most.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, okay.
It's an awful lot. I already took the quiz, so I won't say.
Frances probably knew the answer to that one. I mean, she's a major energy nerd. Sorry, no offense.
I'm happy to be called a nerd.
There is a podcast called the Energy. Oh, it's Energy Gang. It used to be great. It had Jigger Shah before he went over to the loan office at the Department of Energy. He was a fantastic guy. In addition to reducing CO2 emissions, linked energy, what are the other benefits of insulating your home? Okay, this is anybody. All of Jen goes for all of the above. All right. A brand new electric motor yacht to you, Jen, for getting that correct.
Woohoo!
That'd be nice.
Okay, one more question. 5 out of, you see the 5 out of 5 up there at the top. What can you do to help get insulation in more buildings and save CO2 emissions? Tell your representative to support greening all U.S. public housing. Well, sure. Look into further insulation options for your home. Yep. Share with the app community why you support green building codes. I bet a lot of you have no idea how you can do that, but maybe Matthew can show you. But I see we're just at the 7:15, so we're going to take all the above. That's correct, and there we go. So how did we do? Where are we here at the quarter hour, Matthew?
We are really close.
Oh, how about we just stay in here for 2 more
come on,
minutes,
let's do it.
get our second goal. Oh, and I'm looking at one with Saul Griffith. I don't know if you guys know Saul Griffith. He's an Australian who is like a major energy geek. If you hear any opportunity to hear Saul Griffith talk about energy, go for it. You cannot go wrong with that guy. He's amazing.
Yeah, his big thesis, right, Brett, is that we can meet our climate goals if and only if every gas appliance, when it reaches the end of its life, is replaced with an electric one.
Yeah, every single one. That's right. I hope I'm not the only one doing actions here, folks.
Although I think there may be a small exception to that. If you want to replace your gas dryer with a clothesline, I think it still counts.
Right. Non-gas, we should say. Gas with non-gas.
I like that, Francis. Good suggestion.
Okay, 5 more, folks. Somebody, 4 more. Who's got it? Who could do it?
Sent the last one I'm allowed to send.
I think I've sent all of mine
I've
unless I
tapped
missed
out as
them.
well.
I got to cheat and use the follow Elders Climate Action on Facebook one since I'm already
You're already
following.
doing it. Yeah, there you go.
on
I don't know
Facebook.
if that will count on this goal tracker because this goal tracker is only tracking the
Oh, right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I tried doing some others after I finished all the ones on the finished. Well, I didn't put the ones for the video because I didn't think I can't watch the video and hang with you guys, but maybe I should have just I would do it.
I didn't realize that we can track other folks. That's a nice feature. I just saw that. I just saw that you did that, Jen.
Well, we are at time, so I think we didn't quite make it to our goal, but
Close
That-
enough. Close
Actually,
enough.
we made it to the first goal. We just came very close to the second.
That's right.
yes. Thank you, everybody, for all of your efforts tonight at tonight's action party. 150 more actions, 146 more actions in decision makers' inboxes, and that's always a good thing. So everybody, you have a fabulous evening and enjoy the rest of your night.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay, thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you,
See you next
everyone.
month.